Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mind, Body, and Roots. Today I have Boz Malik, who is the president of a chemical company, here to tell about his journey throughout living in America, and I will let him get started.
Okay. Hi, Hub. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. So you want to begin with like how it all started?
How it all started.
Okay. So, well, it's a pleasure to be on your show and to share my story. It's really an American dream story. I'm the youngest of five kids, and my mom and dad. I was born in Pakistan, but my mom and dad moved to the United States in 1969 permanently. And my dad is a doctor. And how we came to America in Indianapolis, Indiana, was Indiana University recruited him to be a professor of pathology at their medical school. So that's how we came to the U.S. In Indianapolis. So, and then my dad, practiced pathology and left academia. But we grew up in Indiana, and it was interesting because at that time there weren't very many people from Pakistan or Indian
Mm-hmm.
subcontinent in the US. During the 60s, that was kind of the first group of people, I would say, that kind of came over. So it was interesting. On one hand, you were extremely unique, which made it fascinating for people. On the other hand, it was very difficult growing up because we were like the only ones. So growing up in school, you would feel like you're the only brown person from that part of the world, and you're trying to on one hand fit in and become an American, and on the other hand, you're getting tugged the other way. But sometimes people would be fascinated with you. Sometimes people would be a little bit difficult towards you, because you were just different. So it was difficult. But music and sports, really sports, saved us. My mom put my brother and I in a
Mm-hmm.
basketball league at age like 5, and Indiana is where basketball started. So basketball's in our blood, and we played pretty competitively. So that we made a lot of friends through sports. And then I was the only one of the 5 kids to pick up an instrument and do music. So I made a lot of friends through that as well. And then and art, I did a lot of art through school, and I made friends through that. So that's how getting involved socially was what kind of allowed us to make friends and assimilate. So I kind of finished my school under elementary schooling, and then junior high school in Indianapolis, and then I went to Purdue University. So all of my siblings, 4 of them, went to IU. I was the only one who went to Purdue, which is an in-state rivalry. So I was the black sheep. But medicine wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
I just was. I'm fascinated and very respect medicine, but it's just some people aren't suited to be a doctor, and I wasn't one of them. So I was very creative, and so I thought I would go to engineering school where I could create things, learn to be an engineer. So
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from Purdue, West Lafayette. I was a mechanical engineer, and then my career has been interesting. I've been working for about 35, 36 years now, believe it or not. But I got my first job in 1990 with General Electric. And at that time, most of my career at GE spanned about 11, 12 years. And I did engineering and design engineering, application engineering, different things for a GE division that was based in Indiana. And then I went into sales and marketing after that assignment, and kind of broadened outside of the technology world. Somewhere in that pattern, 2 years out of school, I also married the love of my life, Mara, and we've been married about 32 years, going on 33. So we got married young. She graduated from Marquette, and then she joined me in Indiana, and then she got a job with GE as well. So she worked with in GE for about 8 years. So that was kind of fun working for the same company. And then during that 10 or 12 year period at GE, we also had 2 of our 3 kids. Our oldest, Nadia, who you're friends with,
Mm-hmm.
who's 26 now and just got married. And so happy for her. And then my son Amar, who's 24 in college, and then my daughter Sasha wasn't born until after GE days. So, but in GE we started in Indiana, then we went to Cleveland, and when I
Mm-hmm.
went to Cleveland, I worked for the lighting business in GE, and I started running businesses at that point and becoming an executive. And then we left GE and we went to Denver, and I worked for a different company there called Johns Manville, which is a Berkshire Hathaway company, manufacturer of different technologies, and I I ran marketing for them globally while we were in Denver for 4 years. And then I ran their America's Composites business before I left. So I just kind of moving my career forward. And in Denver, our little one Sasha was born, and she's now 18 at Texas A&M University as a freshman. So she's a big Denver fan because she was born there. We really enjoyed Colorado. Beautiful state, beautiful state. And then, but part of rising in corporate America and private equity is that you have to move. And a lot of the movement that happens in your career isn't because necessarily you're pushing yourself that way, but when you get noticed and you create a big network, people start pulling you, which is
Mm.
what's happened quite a lot in my career. You make friends, and I've pulled people, and I get pulled by my friends and the network, and that's kind of what happens. So we ended up leaving the position in there, and I went to work for a company called American Woodmark, which is one of the largest makers of cabinetry and counters and things like that in the US. And I ran one half of their business. So I went to lead that business. And that's what brought us to Virginia the first time around. And we lived in Virginia for about 5 years, and I ran that business. And then I got recruited to go to Owens Corning to run a big business for them, which I did. And that was all corporate America, publicly traded companies up until then. And then I had my first shot at private equity. I've always wanted to take a shot at private equity. So
Hmm.
I went back to DC and I worked for Lone Star Funds, and we ran a company there, and we spun it in about 4 years, very very successfully, and I had a lot of fun at private equity. And then I kind of took a break for a little bit and thought I would take a year off. And once that was done, and my wife knows me well, within 3 months I was at it again. And I'm in my current role now. So I work for a company called HB Fuller. They're the largest manufacturer of adhesives and sealants, high tech stuff in the world. And I run one of their three businesses globally.
Hmm.
And I've been now in my sixth year with the company. I don't know anything about chemistry. What I do know is how to lead, companies well and lead manufacturing companies well. And that's where I'm at in my career now. But it's been a great run and a great journey. I can't believe it's been 35, 36 years. But I think through that journey, I've had a lot of help along the way. I hope I've helped a lot of people also along the way, and I'm still having fun doing this. But I've been able to travel the globe. I think I've stepped foot in like 70 countries. Some for vacation, a lot for business, and you learn a lot through the track of business. It really opens your eyes to how the world is connected in different ways, which you wouldn't have that lens otherwise. So I'm grateful for that. But that's my story. Like I said, Samara and I are empty nesters now. All our kids are out of the house. So we're entering that final chapter of our the next phase of the story, which is what do we do
Hmm.
now? So we're having some fun with that. But that's my story in a nutshell.
Very cool. So, like, Boz, do you do anything with dentistry? Because like adhesives and stuff are very
Yeah.
important in our field. So it's like I actually don't know. Like, are you like what part? What do you guys deal with in that sense?
Absolutely. That's a different, like I said, we have three divisions. We have one division that
Hmm.
works primarily on consumer and hygiene and healthcare. And we do make it, so adhesives and sealants, a fascinating thing about them. They're literally in everything you can imagine. Everything you can imagine, from airplanes or clothing or your iPhones and cars. I mean, you just think of it and it's in there somehow, some way. It's
Hmm.
mind boggling. It's mind boggling. But when it comes to dentistry, we do make adhesives that work in dentistry, and we've created a new business focused on medical technology specifically. And some of the recent acquisitions of positions we've taken put us in a leading position in endodermic adhesives. So if there's things that go on top of the skin or wounds that we're closing now
Hmm.
with adhesives. But we're also going inside the body. We have vascular technologies now. We just acquired two or three companies in that space. So literally, IR doctors are going into the body and stopping hemorrhaging and arteries and
Hmm.
capillaries by injecting our medical adhesives in there to stop the hemorrhaging. So it's like the whole medical field will require more of our technology. As you guys continue to advance your
Hmm.
professions, we have to keep up with that. So,
Very cool. So, okay, can you tell me more about private equity? Because that's always like a very interesting field. Because like some people jump in like you did later on in life. Like some people start right out of college and they get burnt out. But like, what was that like for you, kind of joining mid-cycle of your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. Private equity there's different types of private equity companies, but in private
Mm,
equity versus in publicly traded companies, all your numbers are exposed, right? You have
mm,
to, um, by SEC rules, you have to comply with those policies and you have to have compliance to those. And part of that is you have to post your information quarterly as to your results and all kinds of other filings. So I would say in the publicly traded world, you're very exposed. In the private equity world, that doesn't exist. You still have to do audits of your books and things like that to make sure you're in compliance, but the public won't see what
mm,
you're doing because you're private, you're not public. So that's a big difference. The other big difference is there's different types of private equity companies. Some specialize in certain spaces of the market. Some people are good at this, or they have this type of, they're very good at leverage buyouts, for example, or some people
mhm,
want certain spaces like aerospace or whatever. But generally, private equity in general
mhm,
is not as long term of a game. They like to have a portfolio of businesses they either take a position in or have a leading position or just own outright. And
mm,
what they like to do is typically buy these companies, and then somewhere within a 3 to 5 year period after buying them, they like to then sell them. And so the whole mission of private equity is within that 3 to 5 year period is to generate significantly more EBITDA so that when you sell the business later at a multiple of that EBITDA, that's how the private equity companies, buy low, sell high. And that's how they make money for whoever owns them. And they have an
mm,
owner well, right? So that's private equity. So it's a little bit more short term focused, 3 to 5 years versus maybe, a publicly traded company that could be around for decades and decades. That's a big difference. It's all about making that value creation happen right away. So it's a different world. It's a different environment. It can be depending upon the private equity company. It can be very, very challenging where they're always, looking at the company with you almost weekly, if not,
mhm.
very, very detailed. But you have to be used. And there's other private equity companies that are a little bit more off. But one thing I would tell you, regardless of private equity or publicly traded companies, when you're turning in good numbers and you're successful, everyone kind of leaves you alone. When you're having a tough quarter or turning in not so good numbers, you're going to get a lot of attention. So that's just the way business is.
It makes sense. Honestly, a business is a very different field than healthcare. Although nowadays, like healthcare has basically become business. It's not about people anymore, unfortunately. Which is a shame,
Well,
but it is what it is.
yeah.
So I love business. It's like one of my side hobbies. It's like really fun for me. I don't know. Have you heard of the company called Solventum by any chance?
I have heard of them. I'm not immediately familiar with them, but I have heard the name.
So I'm curious because they acquired 3M recently, which is a big dental. Well, I mean, they do a lot of stuff with like adhesives and stuff. So I'm curious, was that technically kind of what you described? Like they basically will grab like a company like 3M and like 5, 6 years they'll probably sell them back or something like that.
Yeah, well, 3M is a massively huge company. I think what they did is bought a piece of 3M that 3M wanted to sell in that
Okay.
space. So that's typically what happens is big conglomerates like a 3M might
Mm-hmm.
look at their portfolio at some time and say, hey, this business no longer fits what we want to do, so let's go sell that piece. And I think that's what happened. I don't think they bought all of 3M because that would be quite a huge undertaking.
Acquisition.
But yeah, but clearly that's what happens. Some companies say, "Hey, this doesn't fit our portfolio anymore right now, and therefore we're going to look to sell those and more go this direction." So that's what that
Mm.
was about. And then what happens is people who want to be in those spaces
Mm-hmm.
where doesn't want to be, would definitely be attracted to that. And that happens in business, for all kinds of companies and industries all the time. I think, one thing I see in your field in dentistry and, just growing up in a medical family, I have tons of friends and colleagues that are doctors and dentists and whatnot. You clearly see, hospitals having a lot of
Mm-hmm.
more play than when I was younger. It was all about private practice. Now it's more about hospitals. But you see private equity in dentistry specifically really stepping up big and creating these networks. And so there's definitely that aspect to it. I would hope to believe that there's a balance there between treating patients well and creating value in a business. I'm hopeful because a lot of the people I've met, Nadia and other doctors I've met, people like yourself, others, and other friends I know, they do care about their patients. I think that needs to to always be there, and I'm hopeful for that. But yeah, you see this private equity entering your area, specifically in dentistry. It's a force in there for sure.
Yeah, it's worrisome because honestly, like, I'm a big proponent of private practice and I'm very anti-DSO. Like, I understand the importance of private equity and why it's a necessity because overhead's rising. It just gets more and more expensive. Staffing, HR, supplies. It's not easy for a solo practitioner to do what they used to be able to do. The only thing that kind of bothers me is that they buy with the intent to work the doctor until they basically burn out and they can't, and then they stop caring about the patient. And I think what worries me, just like you said, is it's about that person that you're treating, right? And if they're not getting the best care because the PE says you can only spend an hour on this patient, or this is the treatment we're going to give you, you lose your autonomy. And then with the loss of autonomy, then you have
Yeah,
like mental health struggles because as a physician or a surgeon or whatever you are, you go into the field to help someone, right? That's your driving factor, your X factor. And when you take that off, I think, you just get sick of it. And my hope is that the private equity starts understanding that, hey, like, listen, if you do this, you're gonna start losing money too because you're in the current moment, yeah, you're milking insurances, you're doing well, but you're killing the workforce, and with that, you're killing quality, and people are gonna turn back to, private
yeah,
practice. So
yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah, I think they're all great points, and I think all of us don't know where things are headed in the
We don't.
future. I mean, none of us have a crystal ball, but with the advent of AI and technology and the speed of technology as fast as it's happening, even in your field in dentistry, clearly, a lot of us get excited about that, thinking, okay, there'll be things that create value in medicine, like cures for things we haven't found before, or ways to do things, quicker, more efficiently, or painlessly, or whatever it is, or more successful outcomes, right? Everybody wants successful outcomes. So there's excitement about the technology, and then you have the disruptive nature of that,
Yeah.
right? And every industry is facing that. Even mine is like, it's like everybody has thoughts, but I don't think in 5 years anyone will be able to figure out how fast it, no one can have that view. I think it's going to come faster than anyone can ever
Mm-hmm.
imagine. I think the genie's out of the bottle and there's no stopping it. And there's just going to be so many inventive people out there doing things with it, and something's going to stick. But I think, and that means all of us need to be, regardless of what industry we are, is out in front of it, trying to participate in it somehow, and to make sure we're agile. What I try and um, emphasize with my leaders, and I have a great team, is, and we always talk about it, is agility is your biggest strength right now. Being able to pivot, because we don't know which direction the wind's going to blow for the next 5 years. So you should have a strategy, but you got to get ready to pivot.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, I recently was approached by a friend who was like, he was a business guy before he was in dentistry, so now he's in dentistry. So he started like a whole little company. He was like, hey, do you want to be one of my co-writers slash content producers for AI in dentistry? And like he's making us interview, well, he asked us to interview a couple people like AI leaders that are getting their feet in dentistry. And the things that people are coming up with, I'm
Yeah,
just like, wow, this is
that's
crazy.
mind
Like we had a
boggling.
gentleman that's literally he just started I think from Canada, but the company he started in Canada, but companies like just got approved in America. It's like your whole front desk experience is powered by artificial intelligence. And it knows when to contact patients, how to like give them costs, like everything's just there. And he was basically presenting in a way, it's like, listen, the average front desk might cost you 45, 50,000. Well, with this AI, it's gonna cost you 20,000. So it's a complete disruptor to like the overhead issue. And like, you start thinking like the only real thing that might be irreplaceable is the dentistry and maybe the assistant, like the actual surgical part. Because you can't have a robot do surgery. Like as much as people want to or have it, it's the empathy and the bedside manners that, people crave and they want. And
Yeah.
AI can't, as far as I know, can't replace it. I could bite my words in a couple of years or decades, but for now it's not there yet. So I'm curious to see how much of a disruptor it will be. I mean, it is already, but it's definitely a unstoppable beast for sure.
Yeah, I was happy to hear you say that empathy for a dentist and or a doctor and whatever medical profession it is for their patients is still important. I can tell you as a patient, I have a very complicated set of teeth because I was in some accidents and things, so I'm a very complicated patient, and I can tell you from my own experience, I've had some great, medical providers in dentistry that have, they've always empathized with me, and that makes a huge difference in the patient.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that. So we need to keep that. But I think, one of the AI terms you see out there a lot is this idea of an AI agent, doing different things. So it'll be interesting to see where that impacts your field in dentistry, but everything we do. I think these agents that are going to be sitting alongside you doing things, that's going to be really interesting to see where that goes, because that one's definitely out there and accelerating. So we'll see where that goes. Yeah. So I just think this whole area is very exciting, but it's going to be disruptive.
100%. So, okay, as a business guy, so I've always wanted to we've talked about pivoting. So I'm a pivoter. I've realized that's how I am. Like if I get bored of something, I pivot. I'm like, this doesn't suit me anymore. I'm gonna go somewhere else and try to spice things up a bit. So I know at some point I want to go into business, whether it's ownership or some type of little company or whatever. Now, do you recommend for the dentists or the doctors listening? Do you think an MBA still has value, or is it better to get like a master's in like AI or something different? Like, where would you, if you had to be in my shoes, where would you go?
Yeah. So this topic of learning business, it's a great question, but I would say anything you do to expand your learning is a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing bad has ever come from somebody learning something.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage people to always do that. I always say I'm a student for life. The minute we stop learning is the minute we start to, commoditize ourselves and life gets boring. But so we should all be students for life. When it comes to business, an MBA certainly can give you exposure to things. I've learned most of my stuff through just raw experience, honestly, and getting out there and doing it. It's amazing. Like I mean, one day I have to play lawyer, one day I have to be HR, one day I have to, uh, you know, be in sales, one day I have to be like CEO, one day I have to, do this, be an ops person or whatever. I have to wear every hat, and but I would say there's competencies in business that are important to learn,
Mm-hmm.
but there's leadership aspects that are also important to learn. So when it comes to learning techniques of business, an MBA can help you, sure.
Mm-hmm.
I would say getting mentors, people in your field or fields you want to be in who've already been there, done that.
Mm.
You can learn more from them than you can an MBA in 1 hour if they're a great mentor.
That is true.
So one thing I've always been blessed with, and I always search for, is great mentors who've taught me amazing things, and I've stolen a lot of best practice. And believe me, mentors love to give back. They love to teach because they know how much it helped them when they were coming up. So we love to give back, and I have mentors. I mentor people right now, and it's just something we should do. But people don't take advantage of that enough, in my opinion, Ahad, especially young people. They think all these successful people they read about or they think about, are unapproachable. Actually, nothing could be farther from the truth. You really should reach out, and you'd be surprised how much people love to mentor. But you might as well learn from people who've already been successful and already done that and have this great wisdom that they can pass on to you. And I would just say in 10 mentoring sessions with a great mentor, you could learn more than an MBA will ever teach you. MBA will teach you vocabulary, some structure, some basics. It can't hurt. But I'd like to take the opportunity to just ad lib a little bit here and say leadership is an incredibly important thing. It doesn't matter whether you're running a practice with 30, 40 people in it, or you're like me where you have thousands of employees around the world. It really doesn't matter. But if you want to be great, you're going to have
Mm.
to learn and invest in being a great leader, which means being a great leader of people, because leaders basically lead people from one destination to another, and our job is to get them to try and follow us there and do great things together. But that's also a learning journey that never ends. Every day you're learning something new and trying something new and trying to better yourself. But I think people highly underestimate how important leadership qualities are, and these have to be built and invested in. You have to practice them. You have to do them. Some people have an innate leadership capabilities. Some people have to learn some new ones. But I think we highly underestimate the importance of leadership that makes things so much greater than just competency. You need competency, but without leadership, it never realizes its greatness. So I would just encourage people like you to do both. Leadership is equally, if not more, important.
Understood. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. So you've had a pretty expansive business background. So, if you had to pick one moment in all of your career, what was one of the most difficult decisions you've had to make in business, and
Yeah.
why?
So I would go back to 2008. I can go to it in 10 seconds because it's pretty painful. But 2008 was a tough year for a lot of people,
Hmm.
because that's when we had the Great Recession. So, what happened during the Great Recession was we had a banking crisis, we had a financial crisis. When you look at recessions, there's some that are just regular, boom bust cycles that happen through economic cycles. And the average recession, if you go back and look at history, if that's an indicator, lasts about maybe 2 years down, and then we start coming out of it. 3 years max. The Great Recession lasted a long time.
Hmm.
We went 5 to 6 years down to the bottom, and it took a good 4 or 5 years to come out of it. It was painful because that was a financial crisis. Financial crises are always far worse than just regular economic cyclical recessions that happen from time to time. And that Great Recession was the most painful thing I've ever gone through in my career, because when it impacts that many businesses and it tanks all the revenue of these companies, here's the tough part: you have to figure out how to survive it.
Yeah.
And so if you're running on 60% less revenue during a great session, for example, than you were before, guess what? You have to reorganize a company from a cost standpoint and from a focus standpoint to survive that and navigate through it. And it's very painful because here's the hard part: you have to put a lot of people out of work. And the tough realization, you realize if you don't do that, then the company won't survive, and then those that are the other that then you're going to ruin the company for good, and no one will have a job. So that's really difficult, though. It's really difficult. It's tough to have to put people out of work, but this happens in businesses. You have to make these tough decisions. But that was a tough time period. It was brutal, and every company that I know of was doing it because it impacted everyone. So I know a lot of people out there can relate to this story, but that was in it. But the day it becomes easy for anybody to tell someone your job's being eliminated is the day that person should have their head examined and go do something else, because it's never an easy thing, never, nor ever should it be. But it's a necessary thing from time to time if businesses have to survive. And that's why I said you won't learn that in MBA school.
Yeah.
This is a leadership thing where you have to learn how to be tough, empathetic, make these difficult decisions for the good of the future of the company or the business. That was it, 2008.
2008. Wow. Yeah, that was a tough year for a lot of people. I think it had to do with like mortgages and like real estate and then like a lot of loans. I'm familiar with it, but I was maybe in like seventh or eighth grade, so I didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. I mean, you read about it like in the boom and bust cycles, like, it might, people are saying, oh, it might happen again. I mean, we have a lot of bubbles in America. So it's very interesting to read up on it and just
Yeah.
kind of like explore it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Well,
I
after
hope,
what happened after that is they started putting the banks under these tests, to
yeah.
say from time to time where they have to like test and report that they're healthy, because it was a mortgage driven thing, but it
Hmm.
really was the banks that were driving a lot of that. So it was a banking crisis more than anything else. And since then, now banks have to pass these financial health tests to prevent those things from happening again. So good news is we haven't seen that again. A
Hmm.
lot of people have learned things from that, and hopefully we never go back to that. But I fully expect recessions to come. It's almost impossible to always
Hmm.
have a boom cycle. You're going to have a recession from time to time, and that's healthy to make a correction as things generally go up. They have to go down a little bit before they go up again. But these big ones, like a great recession, those are no fun. Those should be avoided.
Yeah, I agree. I think it hurts a lot of people, and
Yeah,
some people never recover.
that's
If you
right.
had to, if you had to predict, and not again, you don't have a crystal ball, but you've seen a lot of things like when the boom bust cycle. Do you think we're currently in a recession cycle, or are we going to hit one soon? Just
Yeah.
purely speculative.
Well, the technical definition of a recession is two consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product GDP growth, right?
Hmm.
So we're not there. We're clearly not in a recession from that aspect. I think we've had a soft landing. There was a lot of speculation that we could be in a recession in late 24 or in 25 sometime.
Hmm.
My gut is telling me we won't go there. We're clearly not there now based upon the GDP numbers. Although I do think 2025 is a year where I call it the grind, meaning it's going to be tough and slow. There's certain part of the world that are going to grow faster than others. India for sure, the Middle East for sure, and Mexico. But outside of that, it's going to be fairly slow grind. For a lot of these major areas like China, Europe, North America, and even South America, it's going to be grindy year. So overall, that average is out to a pretty slow year. So you see a lot
Hmm.
of companies right now taking action. Meta said they're going to reduce by 5% their workforce. You see a lot of that happening. Even the tech companies are seeing it. Um, and again, that those are the decisions you have to make. So I do see a slow 2025, and part of that's because the interest rate's so high, right? I mean, when
Hmm.
all the inflation happened, what do governments do around the world? They raise the interest rate to make the cost of capital more expensive, so it tries to slow down the business out there and get people to like halt or postpone things so that it slows things down so that the demand will come down and inflation has a chance to come down with that. It's just basic economics, supply demand. So the interest rate was supposed to come down 6 times in 25, then it changed to 4 times, then 2 times, and now they're probably thinking maybe zero.
Yep.
The Fed just met and said zero right now.
Hmm.
That's interest rates higher for longer, which means it's going to continue to not be liquid out there for people to access capital at a lower cost than they could before. So that's why I think, until interest rates really come down in the US and around the world, it's going to be slow. So even if
Mm.
they start coming down, let's say late 25, by the time that works through the system, you're talking mid 26 at best, because these things have a 6 month to 12 month, and depending upon the industry, lag effect. So that's why I do think it's about positioning through 2025 to get to the other side of this thing on 26. And then I think somewhere, I'm not, I can't predict anything, but my gut is telling me mid 26 we'll start seeing more of a normal market start to come back. But it's depending upon the interest rate coming down.
Yeah, it's very interesting because like you said, like the lag time. Like I read a lot about business. It's like a 6 to 18 month. Once the interest rate is cut, or like there's laws that enact. Obviously, it takes some time to implement it because you won't get like people think, oh, like interest rates are cut and people get excited, the markets go up, and then it's like, wait, give it time. It's not there yet. It
Yeah.
takes a lot longer than you assume, and it's definitely interesting to see those type of trends. In regards to any other businesses advice for young people in particular, because our generation hasn't seen a lot of things you have, what would you guide us to do besides gaining mentorship and such like that?
Yeah. Well, when I was coming out of school and going to work, this is gonna sound funny for some of you who laugh at this. We didn't have phones. We had the dial phones, but we never had a cell phone. There was no such thing as Microsoft Office.
Yep.
We were still doing DOS, which some of you might know. DOS is like star dot star backslash, all that crazy stuff. We were
Mm-hmm.
pretty archaic. We didn't have the technologies that were available today. Internet wasn't there. You didn't have social media or nearly any of the things we have today. AI wasn't even talked about. So the thing is, I've seen this massive, huge change. I think my generation has seen more technology change in its generation than maybe any in its history, because of the advent of computing and telecommunications, and now all the amazing things happening with AI. I mean, it's just those three right there are probably bigger than anything you could think of in history. So, on one hand, young people today have a huge advantage because they have all these tools. And with all those tools, you're able to see a lot more in the world and know a lot more about what's going on in the world at lightning speed, where we, no way, when I was younger. So I think that's a huge advantage for people. And, so you can learn things. Now, what you got to be careful about is what's true and untrue, because the other thing that's out there with all that information is not all of it is true. Some people are deliberately lying out there and trying to make people believe things. So I think the challenge for young people is don't always believe what you read. Take advantage of the technology. Don't be a seeker of that knowledge, and keep up to date with what's going on in the world events and in your country, but in the world, and see what's going on out there. But just because you hear or read something, try and triangulate that data point with a few other sources to make sure it's legit, because that's the one thing we have to do today is make sure the data we're looking at or the whatever the information we're looking at is legit. And so you got to triangulate that. It takes a little bit more time, but we have the tools to do it. So I think that's really, really important. But I would say if I could rewind right now with the internet and everything I have right now, financially, I would be probably, I would not joke, like 50 to 60 times more successful than I am now. And I'm grateful for what I have. Don't get me wrong, but I would have blown this thing up a lot bigger because those tools weren't there and the education wasn't there. So I really encourage young people that regardless of your profession or what you're doing, please get literate about personal finance and
Mm,
learn, I mean, start investing and invest a little bit every single month, because
mhm,
when you invest in a diverse portfolio of things, the earlier you start the better, but you'd be amazed how much more difference it makes if you start in your 20s and then continue that in your 30s. Better late than never, but if you take advantage of those 2 decades and you just take a certain amount every month and invest it and pay yourself first before you start doing everything else in your life. Invest first and then do everything else. I wish I would have learned those things, but nobody taught me those things. They don't teach you this stuff in school. And I wish I would have learned personal finance earlier. So I encourage everybody to please do that because it'll make a huge difference in your future, which matters. Money does matter in this world. And you have so many opportunities now. The other thing I would just say is I think people are going to, I've always said this, that, courage is, if anyone says like, what's one thing you could tell me to do, Boz, or help me with, I would say be courageous. you
mm.
know courage is the connector between anything you want to do and doing it or not doing it. You're going to have guts. And I think this idea of belief mindset act, if you believe in something, truly believe in something, you'll change your mind about it and you'll have a right mindset so you can take the right actions, but it starts with belief. But guess what? When you believe, you have to have courage to believe. If you're going to change your mindset, you have to have courage to change your mindset. And if you're going to do something about it, whatever it is you're trying to do, you're going to have courage to go do it because nothing is just handed to you on a silver plate. Nothing comes easy. You have to work for it. And you're going to go through ups and downs and you're going to have to sometimes, there was a Harvard study done or all these studies done on what's the one characteristic of people that just show success over anything. And a lot of times that data comes back and says it's grit. And grit is that ability to say, are you going to get back up when you get kicked down? And clearly that's critical. And anybody who's been great at anything or achieved anything will tell you they had to like go through the good times and bad times with it and be committed and gritty. But I always say courage, it starts with courage because it even takes courage to do that, to have the grit to get back up when you're faced with some tragedy or loss. So I always believe for me, courage is the most important thing. When I do retire sometime in the near future, there's several books I'm going to write, and I'm going to write a book on courage
I love
because
it.
I really think it's the ingredient that no matter what it is or any concept you think of, you're going to have the courage to make that decision and move and take action, and it takes courage to do that. And courage takes belief in oneself. And sometimes people say, well, what if I don't have courage? I will say, well, there's baby steps you can take instead of taking big moves where you're so fearful of it. Sometimes taking that baby step unleashes the big steps, but you got to at least take a baby step. So sometimes that takes the fear level down a notch to something that's manageable. And this is where mentors, I think, help people have courage. Because when you learn from mentors and their stories, they will encourage you to go do things different. They will encourage you to have courage, and that helps build your. So mentors can help build your courage.
I completely agree. And it's very interesting because like you say courage and like, believing in yourself. And it's something that like I don't know where I found this from. It was like maybe 8 years ago, almost a decade. Crazy. Wow, time flies. But I read something or I heard something and the person I think it was I heard it, but they said if you have the courage enough to believe it and you have I mean sorry, if you believe in something and then you have the courage enough to speak it, it will happen.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's something that I say a lot. And people, I don't know, like, being Pakistani and Pakistani culture, like, oh, people like, don't tell people, don't do this. Like they talk about that concept of nazar and all that. To me, it's mumbo jumbo. I don't believe in it. And I'm like, listen, if you believe in it and you can say it and you have like dignification in your heart, it will happen. Nobody in this world can stop you from that. And
Yeah,
I tell that to everybody, and like, oh, you're crazy. I was like, I tell people my ideas openly, and they're like, oh, well, why do you? And I was like, because I know that 99.9% of people don't have the same capacity to execute. That's just how it is. And I think, you have to have that certain mindset to realize, that's a part of life. And if you realize that early on, you will dominate. And I think you
that's
summed it
right.
up really well. And I think your experience shows it.
Well, thank you very much. It's I think part of listening to you, there's two big points that were in there. One is the willingness to be different than everyone else, because some people call that self-love, some people call that self-confidence, different things. But I call it the bull and cattle. And you've heard that story from my daughter Nadia, because I pass it on to my children because my father taught it to me. But it's a story of when you look at a farm and you see a bunch of cows, you'll see a herd of cows, the cattle, a herd, and you'll see only like one or two bulls out there standing by themselves away from the herd. And the question, my dad asked me and I asked my children is, do you want to be the herd or do you want to be the bull? The herd they just move together blindly. And sometimes where they're moving is good, sometimes where they're moving is not. But the bull sits there and looks at the herd and says, I don't have to join you. Oh, I might join you if I choose to, and I think that's a good thing, but that's my choice. But I don't have to. And here's the other point. So that's like I encourage like my kids, be a bull, don't be like the herd. And as you said, those 10% of the people do that. Well, they're bulls. They're thinking about things, they're critically thinking about things. They're not just blindly doing things. But the other thing is, again, this is where you have to have the courage to say, do I really care what the herd thinks of me? Because a lot of people have a hard time with that. Well, if I do this, what are all of them going to say about me? What are all of them going to think about me? And you have to have the courage to be a bull and say, you know what? Do I want to have a good reputation out there? Do I want people to think positively about me? Sure. But I can't control that. I can control what I do and what I believe and what happiness means to me and what choices I make, but I'm comfortable with that. And if the herd likes that, great. If the herd doesn't like that, too bad. I don't really care about that. But the only way you can really be a bull and have that courage is to relinquish yourself of, I have to have the approval of the herd. How will the herd think of me? And as Daisy's growing up, there was a lot of herd mentality, a lot of
Yes.
it. It's like, oh, what will the community think? Oh my gosh. My son better be like this. My daughter better be like this. Believe me, I was raised in that. However, I see a beautiful evolution taking place where people are getting wiser and smarter and saying, there's a lot more to the world than just that lens. There's a lot more there. And I can choose a blended path or something that defines what happiness means for me. Everybody has different things that makes them happy or sad, but a lot of times people are doing things and faking it for the acceptance of the herd, but then they go back home and they don't feel happy about it, right? So why not be real and just be what you were meant to be and what you desire to be and forget what the herd thinks, whether they like it or not. That doesn't mean you're antisocial. It just means you're strong in your own skin because you only live this life once. And if you're going to live this life trying to please everyone on the planet, you're going to live a very unhappy life.
Yeah. I think you nailed it on the head. Everything you were saying, like, I've been realizing, like, I've been reflecting on it for the last like 5, 6 years. And I'll talk to Nadia about it from time to time. She's like, you like sound like my dad. It's weird. I was like, yeah, probably. It's like, it's interesting. Like, I reflect a lot, and I think everything you said makes a lot of sense. It vibrates with me on that level. So I appreciate you saying that.
But I'm really encouraged by your generation, like my daughter and you and other people out there, and even younger people than you guys, and that are starting out, in their teens, early 20s. I see something in young people that I really am encouraged by. People in their teens, 20s, early 30s, whatever. I just think because you're exposed to more information than we were because of the technology. I've seen something in this generation that encourages me. It seems like, my fear was the technology is going to turn you guys into a bunch of robots and you'll have no hearts. But I've actually seen the opposite happen. I've
Hmm.
seen this generation be more caring, more like not just going with the herd, and more thoughtful about things. Not to say there aren't problems, there's problems in any generation, but I'm just
Mm-hmm.
saying I'm encouraged by what I see because my generation was raised to think very tunnel visioned about stuff. And we had to break out of that mold decades later. But I see this generation kind of not going through that tunnel, and that encourages me.
Hmm. Very, yeah, no, I think we needed to hear that as a generation because I think that we kind of get lost in the sauce. So if the older generation acknowledges it, it means that we're doing something right, whether or not we know it or not. So what I would like to do now is, if you're okay with it, is I'd like to kind of transition into more like the spirituality and like the fitness aspect of your life. So, but I was like, what do you do to like kind of decompress from all of this? Like, what pushes you when you don't have the motivation, the energy to continue, and how do you sustain it?
Yeah. It's a great question, and some days I'm better at it, some days I'm awful at it because it's hard because a career like mine, I have to travel, I have to be on a plane a lot, and I have thousands of employees I'm responsible for, and I care about them, and I want to make good decisions for them and us and our future. So it's a lot of stress, and if you perform in these jobs, you're helping everyone and yourself and your owners. If you don't perform in these jobs, it's a lot of stress. And there's always stress, but the higher you go and the more responsibility you take, the stress just shoots through the roof. Um, the mind, body, spirit aspect of things are very critical. Physically, so I travel 60, 70% of the time. I live at 35,000 feet on an airplane. So I work out probably 6 days a week. I was an athlete playing basketball when I was younger, and that stuck with me. I always said to myself, I want to feel athletic. I mean, I'm 57 now, so as the body get older, you get a few things, you get a few injuries, you have to manage that. But I do just about every day about 20 minutes of calisthenics, and I do about 40
Hmm.
minutes of some type of resistance training. And I'm always looking on YouTube or Instagram, I follow people who are fitness experts, and I'm always learning something new because I hate doing the same workout twice. I'm always trying something different, and that makes it fun for me. But working out isn't like work for me or stressful. I enjoy it. And I tell you why I enjoy it. One is it's that endorphin release, and you feel better when you're physically fit. You just feel a lot better. And there's a linkage there. When you feel bad physically, it's hard to do the spiritual or the mental well. It really is. Everything's connected. And the body's a machine. You guys know in the medical profession more than me. I mean, it's a machine. It's meant to be used. You can't just sit. So I make sure I move a lot. There's hardly a day I won't get 15,000 to 25,000 steps. I'll work standing up. I'll take calls and I'll pace.
Hmm.
People who know me say, "Oh my God, he's going to burn the carpet or the wood," because I pace a lot when I talk. But I'd like to move and be active. So physical fitness is a big part of my life, but it's also my time. Like if I work out in the morning, early in the morning, nobody's conferencing, calling me, texting me, bugging me. That's my time. That's Boz's time to like do his thing. I listen to the music I love to listen to. It's therapy. So I'm getting the
Hmm.
physical fitness, but it's also therapeutic. It's a part of stress relief. Then when I'm in an airplane, it's interesting. People always ask me, "You must do a lot of work on the planes." Zero. The only time I'll do work on a plane is if I absolutely have to, because I'm working my tail off outside of that. And that's another moment where I get time to myself because I can't be called on an airplane, at least not right now, unless some people change the technology. But that's my peaceful time too, to just wind down, think about life. I contemplate things. You look outside and see the sky and the stars or the clouds. It makes you get perspective up there at 37,000. And I use that time to rest the mind, to think about things, to get perspective. I try not to work on a plane unless I absolutely have to. But those are my two moments.
Okay, so we were talking about you being on a plane and using it as like your space to just relax and decompress.
Yeah, I mean, because that is my time. And, in
Hmm.
roles like mine, it's hard to get personal time.
Hmm.
And, a lot of the tough parts is like your hobbies and interests. Like, it's hard to find time for those, because as much as I travel, when I come home, I need to give time to my wife and other responsibilities at home. So that doesn't leave much time for hobbies and interests. So I have to find ways to do that with the family. But I would say, the physical is really important. That time alone when I work out or I'm in the airplane is important. And then spiritually, I do pray once a day at least, sometimes a little bit more, but definitely in the morning, I always do that because I always like to start my day with being grateful, asking for forgiveness, and asking for help.
Hmm.
I do believe that very strongly. I'm less of a ritualist when it comes to faith. I'm more of a spiritualist and connecting the heart with the creator of things. That to me is more where I focus. And then, the mindfulness stuff. It's interesting. I have an executive coach I've been working with just on mindfulness because the mental part, spiritual, physical, I feel pretty good about. But mental, and managing things, he's helping me think about myself differently and how to be mindful about things a little bit differently because that's the area, like I said, I'm a student for life. I'm trying to get better at because these high stress, high responsibility jobs that they'll suck the life wind out of you. So I think balancing mind, body, and spirit in anybody's job, but especially if you've got a high pressure job with lots of people, it's critical.
Makes sense. Yeah. I think I was talking to someone else the other day, and I think it's still very an underestimated portion of our lives. Like, we just don't explain like that 20, 30 minutes either in the morning or after work that you spend. It's absolutely vital to your health. And, I'm like I wake up like 4:30 in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning. I'll work out. Either I'll go for like a run or I'll go to the gym, depending on timing. And then I'll come back in the afternoon and do the same thing. And they're like, "You do two a day?" I'm like, "Dude, what I do is high stress. Like, you don't realize it. I just don't say it. And if I don't decompress, I feel like garbage. Like, I know, like, I injured myself like not even a week or two ago again, and it was like a recurring back injury. I'm like, man, I can't go. And I realized like I took a rest for 3 days. Like, I got antsy. I was like, this is not who I am. So it's just like it's very difficult when you get it in that routine and it's like it's a part of you. It's not easy to
Yeah.
break. So it's important.
Absolutely. One tip I received from someone that said, Boz, you need to write, meaning like keep a daily journal, even if you're writing a couple of times a week on the airplane, whatever. But just finding time somewhere daily or a couple of times a week just to write in a journal
Hmm.
because, sometimes it's just hard to. A lot of us tend to like say, well, I don't want to bother anyone with that. I just got to be tough and I just got to handle this. But that's where writing comes into play because you just like kind of like spit it out on paper and say what you want to say. And it's kind of a way to release it. But good thoughts, bad thoughts. But that's one thing. But there's another thing about starting your morning off with some type of exercise like this of mindfulness and whether it's physical, spiritual, mental. And you see a lot of people writing about this now and a lot of apps coming out where they're saying, hey, stop scrolling. Start your day before you start working. Don't scroll. Take 30 minutes and do this and read these things because it sets your mind, body, and spirit off the right way. So you see a lot of people talking about this now and apps out there and different things. I think that's great though, but there's something about starting your day that way that
Hmm.
that impacts the rest of the day. And if you don't do that, then you just get in the minutia and you're off and running. But just starting your day with 20 or 30 minutes of perspective, meditation, whatever it is, before you just jump so fast into things, it just kind of calms you and it kind of sets you on the right path. And it actually makes you feel so much better as you go throughout the whole day. So there's something about that early morning time. There's a magic hour.
It is a magic hour. And to touch on your point on writing, I've been writing for years, like in journals and like even in my notes section. I picked up that habit from my dad because always like figure out like what's he writing about, and it's like him just reflecting on the day. And he does it pretty religious. It's very interesting. But I started seeing that I've been writing probably like 7, 8 years now, and like I'll do a recap of the year, and it's very interesting. Like I'll write a whole like summary of the year and like what I learned and how I want to get better. And I actually did it for this year. And I reached out to a friend, like kind of wishing him happy birthday because that's how I stay connected with people. And he said, "Hey, I just want you to know, like, I might not say anything, but your writing, I resonated with it. And it's like, it was really nice to hear your struggles." And I was like, "Wait, what?" I was like, "Seriously?" He's like, "Yeah, like, it was nice." Because, like, people don't talk about it. And he's like, "Listen, keep writing because it encourages me that tomorrow will be a better day." And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, like, I never knew that writing and being vulnerable and, just saying it impacts people even if they don't say anything.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's very powerful. And it also, again, is part of that, getting away from the technology for a minute,
hmm.
because when you're writing with a pen on paper or in a journal or whatever you're doing, you're not sitting there going like this or like
Hmm.
this. You're actually a little bit more less robotic about it. So there's something about that too.
So, do you have any fitness goals or mindfulness practices that you want to really hammer down in 2025?
Well, you're going to laugh on my fitness goals. So, Nadia got married last summer, and, weddings are incredibly stressful and they're exciting and wonderful, but they're a lot of work to pull off and do it. So, you end up, that anyone who's been a parent that does this stuff or been through weddings knows this, but you tend to gain a little weight around these things. Like, one, because you're stressed out, so you're looking for comfort food to make yourself better. But I've dropped about 15 pounds since then and kept it off because I just said I'm not doing this. It's over. Time to get back in shape. But one thing I've always said is it's kind of funny is I said at 57 I still have to see some of my abs because I just can't handle the whole having a belly and love handles or any of that nonsense. And I always want to feel and look athletic. So
Hmm.
so I can see some of my abs still. It's not as tight as it used to be, like a ripped 6 pack or 8 pack or anything. But I can. Hey, how many 57-year-olds can see them at least to
Not
some
many.
extent? I've got an outline and some shape, but that to me is important. So that to me is my litmus test. Is like if I said, "Oh, keeping muscle on the body as you get older, it's more challenging." That's the real thing is to stay athletic. So one of my fitness goals this year is to get down to maybe 10 or 11% body fat, which is really
Hmm.
hard to do at my age. It's
Yeah.
really hard to do at 57. But it's doable. It's doable. The biggest challenge there is the diet because you have to eat, but you have to eat the right things at the right time and be so disciplined. And where that gets difficult for me is when I'm traveling on different time zones around different areas of the world. That makes it super hard because now I'm eating at the wrong time. So this one's a tough one for me, but I'm trying. And then the other question was, so that was a fitness goal. What was your other?
Mindfulness.
Okay, mindfulness. Yeah, so mindfulness, I'd like to try and like write at least once a week
Hmm.
and in my diary, journal, etc. I'm not doing too well on that this year, but I got to get going on that. And I have started an app, a mindfulness app that I've added my morning routine after I pray. So I'm gonna squeeze this in for 15 minutes, get up earlier a little bit, 15 minutes, and squeeze it in after I pray, like squeeze it in 15 minutes before I work out. So I'm gonna squeeze this in and see if it helps. But it's meditation focused because my wife and my daughters always talk about, Dad, you need to learn how to meditate. I was like, oh my God, here we go. But a lot of like even when you work out or you pray, it's a form of meditation. But I
Hmm.
know I know what they mean when you really calm the mind and you try and like tune out everything and that kind of meditation. That's what I'm going to try and do. 15 minutes with this app's help. Before I hit the gym.
Very good. I like it. And to comment on your like abs goal, the funny thing is, that's probably gonna be me at 57 too, because I agree with you. I was like, I can't live with a dad bod or whatever they quote it now. I don't even know. Like that fitness is it's a strength. If you look in yourself in the mirror, it's like, am I happy how I look? Because that
Yeah.
affects my performance.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people I travel with all the time, they go, gosh, Boz, when we travel with you on business, we're, somehow, some way you're fitting in a workout, whether it's at lunch or early in the morning or at night when we're done. You go to the gym, they said, you're disciplined. I said, but again, that's that bull mentality versus cattle.
Yeah.
Like, do you have to just accept that this part of my life, I'm supposed to have a dad bod like everyone else? Herd mentality. You don't have to.
Hmm.
But again, you got to have the courage to say that, but then you got to put in the work and it just doesn't get handed to you, right? But for me, again, it's a fun thing and an enjoyable thing. So I think that's a trick people have to get to is how does any type of fitness you do, I don't care what you do, 30 minutes of walking or whatever, make it fun so you want to do it.
Makes sense. So there's something interesting I ran into, like people that I've watched on YouTube and stuff. But some people say like I'll only do business with people that are fit or like are into fitness. And I'm like, I wonder why. And then there's like he explained why. He was like, well, I know that they're disciplined people. They will get the job done. They'll keep their promises and their word. So like I'm curious to see like what are your thoughts on that?
Hmm.
I know it's a little of an
You know,
aggressive take.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've never thought about it that way, to be honest with you, Ahad, but it's interesting. But, I can see the linkage where someone's saying, well, to be fit especially outside of your younger years into your middle age or longer than that, that takes a disciplined mind, someone that's goal oriented, someone that's purposeful and driven to achieve that. I know a guy who used to be on our board of directors that retired from our board of directors, and I just saw him a few weeks ago, and he's probably 76, 78 right now. And he's incredibly fit. I mean, not muscles or anything like that, but I mean, he's strong and he's fit and he has no fat on him and he's active and he's healthy. His joints are good. And I was just like, wow, But again, you have a respect for someone, regardless of their age, young, medium,
Hmm.
old. When someone's fit and they take their fitness seriously, I can see the linkage that you're saying. Well, they had to work for that. They had to drive towards a goal. They had to sacrifice for that. Like when everyone else is eating chocolate cake and gulab jamun and ice cream scoops, you're going, I'm not going to have that. And they all look at you like, come on, just have a bite.
Yeah.
Nope. And
Nope.
it's hard, but you respect people like that. So I can see the linkage there. I haven't heard people say I'm not going to do some business with someone who isn't fit. That's interesting. That's a new one, but I can see the linkage.
Hmm. Very cool. No, yeah, I was just curious to get your take on it.
But
Now,
I do have to tell you though, when I go as a patient to
yeah.
see anyone in the medical profession and they're not fit, I do get I honestly, I will say this, I get a negative impression of that
Yes.
doctor. They can be smart as heck, but it seems a little hypocritical to me that here you are telling me to do all this stuff, but look at you, you're completely out of shape and you're a horrible medical.
Correct.
So to me, I would think, if you're an athletic trainer and you're going to train a professional sports team and you look like a slob, no athlete's going to want to be trained by you.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I came up with that conclusion a couple of years ago myself. I was like, how can doctors and surgeons and dentists be unfit? You guys know what happens to the human body. And like, maybe I'm putting a broad stroke, but some of them even have really bad habits. And I'm
Yep.
just like, but like, I saw ladies outside of NYU Langone, like, where like, there was one lady that was a cancer, I think like an oncologist, and she was out there smoking cigarettes. And I'm like, how? Like, you're cure cancer, you tell patients not to do something, but you're doing it yourself. It's like the antithesis. Like, why are you even practicing? So, like, I completely agree. Like, if you're not fit and you're in medicine or dentistry or whatever, I definitely will not take you as seriously. I just won't. I won't. I'll stop going to, because I just
Yep.
don't believe that you don't practice what you preach, unfortunately.
There you go. Especially, when you're in medical profession, I can see that being critical.
Hmm.
But in business, I've never seen someone say, I'm not going to do business with that person because they're not fit. I've never seen it, but that's interesting.
Yeah, but it's different, I guess, and
Yeah.
sometimes different's a good thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I want you to talk about how it was growing up as a first generation Pakistani in the late 60s to the 70s and so on. Like, what was it like? Like, what was so different? What was challenging? What did you enjoy
Yeah.
about it? How did you meet your wife? Tell me all the little nuances. I just
Yeah.
want to kind of hear about that.
Yeah, like I said earlier, being the only brown kid in school from a country named Pakistan that nobody even knows that exists on the planet, and they knew very little about any other religion other than Christianity, to be honest with you. People might have even known a little bit about Judaism back then, but even then, it was pretty much all Christianity, and back then, all the schools, when it was Christmas time, you'd have Christmas trees. You were expected to sing Christmas songs and give
Mm-hmm.
Christmas presents and do all that. Not that it's a bad thing, but it just wasn't as diverse, right?
Mm.
It was very much that way. And I remember as a kid, several times, my family was on a news station on a talk show where they're saying, like, we have people from Pakistan and in Indiana. And they were like, had us on a talk show, like, what's this all about? I think one advantage I had is that even though I grew up in a heavily white middle class, neighborhood in my early days, everyone loves a doctor. And so the fact that my dad was a doctor, like, oh, we have a doctor living on our street. That's awesome. So they have instant respect. So I think that's honestly saved us. I think if my dad was a plumber or something, it would be tough. But plumbers make great living now.
Yeah,
They
they do.
make a lot of money now. But back then, it was like if there was a doctor on your street, you'd be like, super excited. Oh, we have a
Mm-hmm.
doctor on our street. So that really saved us, and people that helped with the acceptance. But it was really, really, really hard. I mean, people would sometimes make fun of your name, that kind of thing. But the other person that made it interesting was, believe it or not, was Muhammad Ali, because he was so successful during the came up in the 60s. It was so successful to the 70s that, everybody knew that name. And so you would have some, uplift because they said, oh, okay, isn't he a Muslim too? Yeah, he is. So that helped, because everybody loved him. Um, those things made it tough. But we had some help. But it was very, very, very difficult being unique, especially when people treated you, I would say a little bit more isolated or make fun of your name or this or that because you were just different. But again, as I got more athletic, then that saved me. So that was interesting. But I would say, just two more things. One is, on one hand, when you're first generation, your parents want you to be assimilated, but at the same time, they don't want you to be assimilated.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, it's okay to do this, but all those other things that you needed to know. For example, you're going to laugh at this, but, our parents who came in the 70s wanted us wearing dress slacks and dress shoes and full length shirt and thing, like you go to formal boarding school or something, to your elementary school. So I'd be on the playground wearing that crap, and everybody else is wearing jeans and tennis shoes and whatever. I was like, God, thank God my mom finally started going to some PTA meetings, and she learned about, this. And she said, I got to put jeans and tennis shoes on the kids or they're going to go through hell. I'm like, thank you, mom. And my dad literally said, though he's softened up a lot, but back then, it was tough. He'd say, well, if you want to take him shopping for jeans and tennis shoes, you do that. I'm not going to do it. But that's what it was like. And so we had to like break into that. But it was horrible, right? And then when, just wearing clothes that everybody else wore was
Mm-hmm.
something as simple as that, was a challenge in elementary school. And then you have the whole peer pressure thing, because our parents back then were pretty strict. And when everyone else could go to parties and do this and do that, you were held back from that. You can go to basketball practice after school, but if Johnny's having a party at his house on a Thursday night or Friday night or whatever, Saturday night, nope, you're not going.
Mm-hmm.
So, on one hand, they're saying assimilate. On the other hand, no. And so that was tough. And so those two things made it interesting. My older brothers and sisters, some of them were 10 or 11 years older than me. Back then, the way people met each other and got introduced and everything was still pretty traditional. Like someone would introduce you to so and so, and the families would get together. Typical, traditional rishta type of thing. And so I saw, my sisters go through that. My oldest sister kind of did that, kind of wanted to meet, she met her husband a little bit differently. They saw each other in college and then did the rishta thing. My older sister did a formal rishta, and then my oldest brother, I think he kind of bucked the trend, didn't want to get married that way. Like I said, it was very tough growing up, being first generation and not having a lot of support structure. Yeah, keep in mind, when we were raised, there were no mosques, there was no community. Oh, hang out with the Pakistanis, Desis. Where are they? They don't exist. There was very few. There might have been 5 families, and then more started coming. But in the beginning, it was barely anyone. So that made it hard. So my brother ended up going off track and married a Christian gal, Wendy, and they're fine. They have kids and they've been married all this time, and he's retired now. And she ended up converting on her own about several years ago because she wanted to, not because she was forced to. And things evolved, right? And then my other brother got married a traditional way, and then I got married, I would say, semi-traditionally. My oldest sister and her sister-in-law started talking about me in Samara, and they played matchmaker. So they kind of like found a way to introduce us, and then we talked on the phone quite a lot, and then met Samara's family with my sister and her husband. And from there, just started talking to her on the phone a lot. I mean, because back then we didn't have cell phones. They were like the old attached to the wall. I mean, cordless wasn't even, it was just barely starting to come out of cordless phone. But and believe it or not, Samara and I wrote to each other. You could still write a
Wow.
letter and send it in the mail. And she's kept all those letters to this day in a box somewhere in the attic. But that's how we do it. Email didn't exist. You couldn't text. So you'd write letters to each other and chat on the phone, but you couldn't see each other. You can't
Hmm.
FaceTime, you can't text, can't do any of that. So it was that way, and then we just took a liking to each other. And then her mom asked me one day, she said, after a couple of families, she said, you can come up here to whenever you want, and you can hang out. You know that, right? And I was like, oh, okay, because I didn't know because I was kind of like had my feet in two boats. I didn't really like the traditional way. I
Yeah,
really also didn't like the just open dating thing because
correct.
no matter what you do, you're going to take a huge risk. And one of the things my dad told me, because you're taking two human bodies going like this, and there's going to be friction. But the
Hmm.
more you have in common, the less friction you have. So try and find somebody that you're going to have friction, but try not to have a lot. So that was good wisdom. But and then what was interesting, I was very fortunate, and Samara and I were very lucky to have found each other because she also I came over when I was 2. She came over. She was 5. So a lot of the things I felt growing up, she felt growing up. So we could immediately relate to that because she came, I came over before she did, but she also knows what it's like to grow up without that much of a true support structure around you. And then and she was educated, I was educated, and we just hit it off chemistry wise. And then we had similar values and similar goals and objectives and things like that, and it just started to work itself out right, feel right. But after about 6 or 8 months of that, some people have this weird. I got married when I was 24. She was 21. We got married early. Some people want to wait, which is fine. But I think when you find your person, you find your person, right? Somewhere along that journey, when you just know, like, okay, this is my person, that's your person. So sometimes it hits you young, sometimes it hits you later. No one knows, but when you find your person, I think inside one feels a certain thing that you can't explain, and you say, that's my person. So I think we both felt that, and we said it was the right thing to do. And here we are, 32 years later, almost 33, more than 3 decades later, and we've lived a great life together and want to continue to do that. But I think what really drew me to her is that she could relate to me because she was raised kind of the same way I was. And it doesn't hurt that both our families were Punjabi. We had the same views on spirituality for the most part, things like that. So, I think that mattered. If it would be tough for me to marry someone who was like still overseas, for example. It would also be tough, I think, for me to marry somebody like maybe some do, who are, not from our culture, but from a different culture, and Americans like us, but from a different culture or country entirely. I think that would have been difficult for me. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you have to know who you are. I just think for me, I found somebody who comes from my same place but was raised in America at a young age like I was, and we both love our country, United States. We love our heritage, all that stuff, and we've learned from each other. But I think that sweet spot was good for me to find.
That was a really like informative, like just insight. Because like the funny thing is, so you grew up as first gen, I grew up as first gen. So I completely like everything you said about the clothing. Like I was dressed up in slacks, dress shirt, like, and this is the '90s, by the way. At that point, like, and like my mom's like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, mom, like I'm always dressed like this, and everyone's wearing jeans and t-shirts, and I don't get it. And my dad's like, yeah, but this is the way to dress. He's like, this is how we dress. It's the right way. And I was like, Dad, I just don't fit in. And he's like, well, I don't care if you fit in, don't fit in. Eventually, my mom was like, okay, you know what? Let's just take them to like these brand names. And like my dad be like, oh, what's the cost of this? Like $20. What do you mean $20? That's a lot of money, you know?
Yeah.
It was a good struggle. And because we were raised very traditionally. And like you said, like you're fighting, I'm the oldest, and it was hard because I'm fighting, not losing how I was raised as a traditionalist, but also blending into the American culture. So it's definitely a very, I would say, interesting blend. As a first gen, it's a lot of difficulties that we don't talk about. So I agree with you. And the way that you like, talk about Samara, Auntie, and like all of these things, it's I can see the parallels, and you gave good advice. And it's something I've come to realize, and I've even sought advice from Nadia about this because I was like, what did you look for? And she said something similar. She's like, it doesn't have to be just based on looks or background. It has to be that friction, the least amount of friction you have, because you're gonna have friction, the more it makes sense. And you have to find someone that's raised like you. And it doesn't matter where they're from, but
Mhm.
it's more about, can you just get along and put your differences aside to achieve that common goal? Everything you said is a pretty big heavy hitter, and I see it. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, because marriage is an interesting thing. It requires more than just infatuation and attraction and enjoyment and everything. You're gonna have a lot of things that throw curveballs. And everybody has that in their life. And when you're married, you have two people with curveballs happening at the same time, and they will happen. And that's a test of your strength together. That's that grit and commitment we're talking about. It takes that. And so I'm not saying opposites can attract, but when you have someone who kind of gets you and you get them and you can relate on certain things because you've experienced them or know them together versus someone who has no idea what you're feeling or talking about because
Mm-hmm.
they come from a different world, it just makes it easier to handle the curveballs.
Yeah.
But I probably have time for one more because I do have to run here. But
Perfect.
I really enjoyed talking with you. But probably time for one
Absolutely.
more.
I have basically two real quick questions
Yeah.
because you kind of answered most of them. So my last two questions are, on your gravestone, if you had to write a phrase, what would it be and why? And then the last one is, if you had to describe Boz in one word, what would it be?
Okay. So the one word would be courage. Because that's what I try and embody. As far as like what I want my grave to say, something like that, it's always a tough thing to say. But for me, I just want to say he was a good servant leader. Tried to make the world probably the best way I like to say is everything he touched, he tried to make it better than when he first got it. And that applies to everything, whether it's your family, your friends, your work, your faith. So I think we should all, at least I like to say, is like I want to make a positive impact before I go.
Hmm.
So I want my tombstone to say something about that I tried to make a positive impact with things I had in my own little way an ability to influence or work on before I left. Because I think if I just went through this world and went through the motions but didn't contribute anything, I would feel awful. But I want to contribute something positive and leave something positive behind.
I love it. I think I really like that. I really appreciate that sentiment. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time, Boz. It's been great talking to you. I think the younger generation and people even in your generation will appreciate like this once I post it. And so I just want to say thank you so much to everyone
You're
listening
welcome.
on today's episode. Thank you again for your time. Be well, everyone, and take care.